The real power of AI isn't just giving you answers, it's helping you find the questions that you didn't even know to ask. Welcome to the Leadership Career Accelerator, where we help aspiring leaders like you build executive presence, influence with impact, and get recognized and promoted. I am longtime CEO Barry Moline. My mission is to help you grow as a leader, elevate your career, and improve your life. If you enjoy learning leadership tools, hit subscribe. In return, my promise is to keep bringing you ideas that make you a better leader. What happens when AI becomes powerful enough to reshape jobs, challenge governments, accelerate robotics, and change the way entire industries operated? In part 2 of my conversation with AI expert Austin Ambrozi, we move from everyday AI use to the bigger questions leaders and professionals need to understand now: job disruption, universal basic income, artificial general intelligence or AGI, robotics, data centers, and the concentration of power among major AI companies. This isn't just a technology conversation, it's a leadership conversation. AI is changing who has leverage, the skills that will remain valuable, how companies compete, and how professionals like you need to think about your own future. Austin explains why the people closest to frontier AI are sounding the alarm, why some jobs will be protected by the human element, and why continuous learning may be the most practical career strategy in a fast-changing economy. In this episode, you'll understand why AI-driven job disruption is pushing universal basic income into the mainstream conversation. You'll learn how artificial general intelligence, robotics, and AI-powered systems could reshape professional work, law enforcement, infrastructure, and daily life. And you'll discover why the future belongs to people who keep learning, adapt quickly, and use AI as leverage instead of resisting it. So stay tuned to hear where AI may be headed next and what you can do now to stay relevant, useful, and ready for the future of work. Today in part 2, we're continuing our talk with Austin Ambrozi. Austin is a keynote speaker on AI and entrepreneurship. He's advised NASA, and he's been a speaker at the Davos World Economic Forum. Austin leads the Forbes Business Council AI Group and serves on the AI Council for United World Leaders, where he briefs over 20 current and former presidents and prime ministers. I've known Austin for a few years, and he is an expert in all things AI and where it's going. As we continue our conversation, I'm still excited because you're going to continue learning how to maximize AI in your world and how to ensure that you are ahead of the curve in AI and not playing catch up. Let's get into it. So on UBI taxing AI companies, do you think that debate is still going to develop, and do you think it might even happen?
Yeah, I do. I think that all of the people that are the most well-informed about this, right, which in my opinion would be the CEOs of these frontier labs. Like, there's no piece of information regarding their frontier lab that they don't have access to if they want it. They're sounding the alarms. They're not doing it quietly. They're not, they're publishing essays, and they're saying, like, on, Fox News, CNN, and, these different places where they're Davos and these other, like, all of the biggest stages and the most cameras went out. They're saying, hey, this is going to accelerate. We are going to need to initiate universal basic income. And I think we should listen to them. And really the only critique that I've heard, or from the naysayers, is like, oh, that's just publicity. It's just them marketing. They want everybody to think that their company is going to be really big so they get more investments and yada, yada, yada. But I just don't see that angle of it, because the proof is in the pudding, if that was the angle, that would be reflected in the quality of the models. And you would see that in terms of like how many people start using it and how many, but we're seeing the opposite. ChatGPT has over 1 billion monthly users. That's not trivial. That's a big deal. That's a societal level, global level shift here. We're seeing the layoffs. We're seeing like all of the things, like you said, that the predictions that I've made have borne fruit. It's like, I wish I could take credit, but I'm not these aren't original predictions. I've reached these conclusions of my own accord, sure. But Elon's saying this, Dario Amadeus is saying this, Sam Altman's saying this. The only people that I hear not saying this are people that are not in the industry. And it seems kind of foolish to heed advice about the direction of an industry from somebody who's not in the industry, So OpenAI put out a paper comparing it to the situation that they do in Alaska with oil, where apparently, and I'm not the most up to date on this, I might butcher this to some extent, but apparently they get a bunch of oil from Alaska, right? And they say, hey, the citizens of Alaska need to benefit from this as like a public commodity. And so they distribute the wealth, and so however they do it, to give sort of like an effect. I don't know if it's tax credits or if it's stipends or however they do it, but they receive, the citizens who have nothing to do with oil, just for living there, receive economic prosperity from that good as a public commodity. And I think that that's a great comparison. It shows that we've done it. I think that in a lot of ways, I think that like the stipend checks that were issued during COVID were sort of like a preliminary stress test like run of like, what does this look like when we actually try to do this? I don't think that it's going to jump right to UBI. I think what's going to happen first is that unemployment benefits are going to like skyrocket. I think that if you can show evidence, I don't know how they'll do it, if the burden will be on the employee or on the company, but I think unemployment benefits will rise, and then it will, I don't know at what point we cross over into like talking about actual UBI for every citizen, but I think that it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. In Alaska, everybody gets a check. Literally,
every
man, woman, and child gets a check. That's a royalty check from oil production. Yeah. They don't pay state income tax, and they all get a check. I mean, it's not a ton of money, but it's probably a few $1,000s per person. Yeah,
it's a proof of concept. Yeah, it's money that would that buys groceries or what. It has a material impact. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so mergers, poaching of employees, what's going on in the large AI companies? Are those people just ping-ponging back and forth? What's really happening there?
There's been a lot of that. It has been a battlefield from what I can tell. There's stories of Zuckerberg was trying to get some young AI prodigy to join his company. Company offers him $125 million. Guy says no. Zuckerberg himself steps in, has a meeting with him, and doubles it to 250. Well, then the guy's on board and joins the team. And that's an example from a company that has like kind of butchered a lot of their AI aspirations in a lot of ways. You've seen, nobody's flopped harder and butchered their chances as bad as Apple, from what I've seen. They've been trying to make Siri. You've been hearing rumors about a much smarter Siri for years and years now. It hasn't happened. They reached a point, I think it was earlier this year or might have been last year, where they reached a deal with Google where they said, okay, we're going to have Gemini power Siri. It's still going to be called, like, the branding's still going to be Siri and whatnot, but it's actually Gemini under the hood. So you're starting to see a lot of people concede and realize that they can't compete. Like, that's why I think Meta is leaning so hard into the smart, like the Meta Ray-Ban glasses and things like that. Like, they realize that they're not going to be a frontier AI lab. They're not going to be able to compete with OpenAI and whatnot, but they can own that hardware layer. That's good. You're seeing people like Bezos started a company called Prometheus. He's back to being CEO. He'd retired from being CEO of Amazon. Prometheus is not going to try to be the next ChatGPT or the next Claude. It knows that it can't take that prize, so it's trying to niche down and just be there for helping with hardware inventions, so like inventing products and whatnot, which is kind of in his wheelhouse with Amazon and everything like that. So I just think things are like that are interesting because it's becoming clear, like basically, as for the Western frontier labs, everyone's kind of given up. When I say given up, I mean given up on winning the gold medal, right? They're like, okay, let's make sure we win bronze, right? Everyone's kind of given up on winning the gold medal except for Anthropic with Claude, OpenAI with ChatGPT, and Google with Gemini. And I guess maybe Elon with Grok and whatnot, but I think that one's coming. I think that concession is coming. So in my opinion, it's those three are still the ones that are front runners. And you're seeing a lot of poaching. And currently the battle that's happening the tightest is between Google and Anthropic, from what I can tell. Several of the Google DeepMind researchers and people that won Nobel Prizes for their works with Google's AlphaFold just got poached to Anthropic and whatnot. So yeah, you're seeing there's been a lot of that. I think it's going to slow down just because the winners are starting to get established and people are making concessions and trying to set up camp, so to speak, and where they're going to be in the marketplace. But there's still going to be some more poaching and some more drama, I'm sure.
Wow. Okay. But at least we're seeing a shakeout. And that's kind of interesting in its own right. Yeah.
Things are happening.
There was political tension between the U.S. government and Anthropic. At least initially, it was about a sort of a philosophical element of Anthropic. I forget which model, but it begins with a P. Was being used by the Department of Defense.
Opus.
Is it Opus?
I think so.
That was being used by Department of Defense for identifying targets and to shoot at. Humans were still making the decisions about which targets to bomb, but the employees at Anthropic there was an uprising saying, we don't want our technology to automatically be used to bomb targets. So Anthropic raised that issue at the Department of Defense, and DoD didn't like it, and then created some havoc with classifying Anthropic as a company that could not do work with the federal government. I mean, that's more or less what the initial dust-up was, but I know that there's been some additional concerns. So did I describe that right? And then where are we now?
Mostly, yeah. So this was before this scandal started. I don't know if it's a scandal, but this situation started before the mythos and fable allegory that I talked about earlier. And basically what it was is, I think it was, in February, whenever the Iran war.
I think it was Perplexity that was used. And who operates Perplexity? Do I have that wrong?
I don't think it was Perplexity. I think it was Opus, because that was Anthropic's leading model, and I know that Anthropic was the company. Okay. But the situation was the government used Claude in some of the initial strikes that kicked off the war with Iran. And that's public information. And then basically Anthropic put their foot down and said, we are not going to allow you to use our models for A, the mass surveillance of U.S. citizens, nor B, autonomous weapons, whether those autonomous weapons are here or abroad. Those were the two things. And the government came back and said, no, you're going to let us use it for any lawful government purpose because you are in the private sector and we are the government. And Anthropic said, nope, we won't. So, and then there was this standoff, and they threatened to hit Anthropic with a supply chain risk label, which they have not done to any company since World War II. It's the equivalent of being like a foreign adversary. And that is a very important milestone for where this whole story is at, because at the same time, they threatened this label. They're like, we're going to blackball you, we're going to pull your contracts and whatnot. And then Anthropic said, okay, do it. And at the same time, while the lawsuit's going on, between the two entities, right? Anthropic's like, yeah, we'll see you in court. While that lawsuit's going on, another branch is still saying, okay, well, while this lawsuit's going on, we still need to use it for the capabilities that you'll let us use it for, because like we really need this, whatnot. And that like perfectly encapsulates where we're at right now, where it's like, even though you have this like raw objective defiance to the government is still saying, okay, but we need you. Right. And that is like in no other circumstances, especially with the current administration, under no other circumstances would something like that happen if the tech was not truly that powerful. I don't think it's just marketing like that. You would have to have the government in it. Like it just doesn't make sense for it to be marketing. And so when you like Naval Ravikant's brilliant, man, and he talked about this, this was probably 10 years ago whenever he said this, and stuck in my head ever since. And he said that evolution touches leverage too. And the first form of leverage was human capital. And that was, like I could work with my hands. And then the first form of leverage was human capital. So now other people could work for me and do things. Right. And then that was like the strongest form of leverage for a while. And then like money came about, and it's like, okay, well now I can have money work for me and money do things, and money could also pay for that human capital and whatnot. So it's like there was the self, and then there was human capital, and then money was even bigger, and money seemed like it was going to kind of be the biggest and whatnot. And then he said, and now the new form of leverage is technology, where it's technology working for you and whatnot. And when he said that, I was like, I don't know. I was like, could technology really be bigger than money? I was like, I can't imagine Silicon Valley being more consequential to the world than Wall Street. But then the Cambridge Analytica scandal happened, and everybody's talking about how Facebook could influence elections. And I was like, oh, wow. Well, that's all that I needed to see. Yes, tech could reach a point of being more impactful than government, like than money. Like he who owns the machines, like what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Like if I'm the one person that owns Facebook and I want to influence an election, granted that it's breaking laws, whatever else, but if I want to influence an election, if you offer me $1 trillion and I say no, I can still do what I want. That's all the evidence that you need that has more leverage. And so that's kind of what I think we're seeing here today is, despite the fact that we have our government, which is supposed to be in control and whatnot, you have this, firm saying, we're not going to let you use our tech that way. And the government's still like, okay, well, we still need you and whatnot. So it's just evidence of how much more leverage the tech is acquiring. And I don't see any signs of it slowing down.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And didn't OpenAI sign a parallel agreement with Department of Defense saying that they would provide a model that could be used in the ways that Anthropic didn't want?
I got to check. I got to double check on what the latest is with that story. I know at one point what that story is at first, all of the firms, like all the big tech firms, stood behind Anthropic. They were like, no, we agree. Like, blah, blah, blah. And in the midst of that, OpenAI, same day, signs a contract with the DoD saying, like, okay, we'll let you do it for any lawful government purpose. And they did that. And then immediately after that, they flipped the script again and say, okay, well, just like Anthropic didn't want you to do it, mass surveillance on citizens or autonomous weapons, we're going to hold the same stance. So I don't know if they've regressed from that or but that was what I saw, was that they kind of like fibbed to get the contract, and then they hit them with the same stance once they did.
Got it. Okay. By the way, the U.S. government, all government, state government, local government, I'm going to say this the wrong way, and then I'll explain it. They're not the smartest knives in the drawer. And what I mean by that is not that they're not smart people, is that they don't have the same level of information that private industry has.
And specialists have.
Yes. Because it costs money to hire those people, and government has limited money.
Well, they have so many other things they have to do.
Yeah, and they have to be fair when they're doing it. Anyway, the point is, we tend to think about government as this all-knowing, big brother thing, and it's really hard to do that.
It's just people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just people, and they generally are several steps behind the cutting edge. So maybe in a few areas they're on top of it. And maybe one of those is defense, for example, because that's a big brand for the government. But in a lot of other areas where they are, where private industry is pushing the envelope, government is playing catch up.
And honestly, what you just said, that taps on my biggest unresolved philosophical conflict, because most of these I can tell you like which side of the fence. I'm pretty radical in some extent. I'm like, yep, the robots are coming, UBI's coming, get ready. I've got my mind made up in a lot of ways. One of the few ways that I don't have my mind made up yet is in this distinction between who should have a say in what gets done with this tech and what's too dangerous and whatnot, where it's like, on the one hand, it's like, okay, the government's behind, so we should trust the people that are living it day in, day out. They're the most informed and whatnot. But then the critique of that is like, okay, so you want to basically surmount the U.S. Constitution and impose like technological oligarchs and whatnot. And I'm like, well, that's actually a pretty good critique, and I don't have an answer for that because neither one of them sounds correct to me. So maybe the real answer is some sort of fusion, but I have no idea what that looks like, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. It's complicated. All right, so you introduced to me the concept of artificial general intelligence, which I asked you the first time we talked to, like, what was that? And as I recall, you explained it as the AI is smarter than all of us put together. Is that accurate?
Well, everybody's got a different definition. Back in like the 70s and 80s, it was pretty consistent, and then we got closer to it and realized it wasn't as cut and dry as we thought. So a lot of different definitions started popping up. The one that I've been using consistently for the last like 5 years or so is that AGI is where it would reach a level like comparable to the average human's level of intelligence across every domain. And the average, like, most humans do not have an average level of intelligence across every domain. They could have it across most domains, or they could be really smart in some domains. But I can tell you right now, there are certain domains that I know nothing about. You know what I mean? I couldn't tell you anything about baking. I couldn't tell you anything about nuclear physics. I'd struggle to remember anything about calculus, to actually tutor you. You know what I mean? So like there are different things and whatnot. And so whenever you reach a point where a machine's at average level of intelligence for every domain, the sum total of that is that it's basically equivalent or smarter to any human.
Got it. And where are we on that road toward AGI?
I suppose my definition that I've been using for the past 5 years hasn't officially been hit, but I would still say that we are there because of how far above average AI has got at coding. In my opinion, we have reached AGI. It's happening right now. And the reason I say that is, 75% of Google's code that they've shipped in the last year was written by AI. Most of the code that has been pushed in the latest Claude updates was written by Claude itself. So the self-recursive improvement loop has already begun. And I think that whenever we're seeing headlines such as the NSA and the NSA saying that Mythos broke into all their classified systems not in weeks but in hours, even if we're not at average level of intelligence across every domain, we are so far beyond average in some very critical domains that for all intents and purposes, I think it's time for us to accept that we are there, because especially since one of those domains is coding, because due to the fact that one of those domains is coding, that tells me like the genie's out of the bottle. The other domains you're going to be very close to follow. It's just that the largest incentives have been with coding.
Interesting. So overall, the point is AGI is a thing, and our knowledge, our brain is connected on this phone, and we can get a ton of stuff on every topic, smarter than us in almost every way. If you're an expert in your area, it might not be smarter than you, but it's going to rival you, right?
It's going to give somebody the leverage to, it depends on the field. What I think a better way of framing it is that 95 to 99% of the time now, if I have a question, I should ask AI, which feels like a crazy thing to say, but like, I felt like it's been that way for a while. I mean, there's how many times did somebody ask you something that you're like, why don't you just Google it, And there's a skill ladder with Google, right? Like there's ways that, I've seen people Google things. So I'm like, I would not have prompted it that way. I would have asked it differently, and Google could be more useful and like leveraged better. The same is true with AI. So it depends on how well you are at using the tool. But if you are capable of using the tool to its full potential, there's almost no question that you should ask another person that you wouldn't get a comparable answer from AI, and you would save that human that you were going to ask, you'd save them some time.
Wow. I mean, I don't deny that because I see it with my own eyes, and it's just pretty strange. So it's just like a wow moment, that we all have access to a tremendous knowledge base. So where's that going to take us?
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to what I said earlier about it's about how much the individual wants to leverage themselves. I think if somebody wants to, because that's really all it is it's like Steve Jobs said, the computer is a bicycle for the mind, and this is sort of like a sports car or a rocket ship for the mind, where it could still take you to some places you don't want to go, or like, you still make a wrong turn and waste some time, or you get some inaccurate information and whatnot. But the speed and the number of reps that you can get by way of the speed are, it's hard for me to downplay, or it's hard for me to overstate the significance.
Yeah. You mentioned robotics earlier. We don't have to get deep into robotics, but it appears as though robotics is advancing pretty rapidly from the funniest home videos kind of situation where robots are trying to do things and they're falling over, to now robots running faster in China in a half marathon than the humans. And not all the robots in that part of the race completed the race because they ran out of battery or they just fell over. But many robots did win the race or went faster than humans and looked pretty little weird, but kind of pretty amazing as they were running. I mean, just running like very steady along the street. But that's just running. We've been using robots for many, many decades, probably for four to five decades. Yeah, 4 to 5 decades. Initially in the auto industry, where robotic arms have been welding and moving cars along and so on. And one can even argue that elements of Henry Ford's conveyor belt line had elements of robotic elements in it. Still, the point is, we've been advancing more rapidly recently. Do you have any perspectives on robotics? And there's robotics, and then you can also say almost immediately, and the impact on jobs. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that robotics is still on the rise. It's just that we forget about it because we don't see it as often. Because most of these places that it's on, for one, there's a much larger incentive. It makes much more financial sense to service businesses with robotics than it does customers right now. And when I say it makes financial sense, partially because if I solve the things that I would want a home robot for are not the same things that you would want a home robot for. Now, there's probably like a target profile that you could build on people that are similar to me and whatnot, but like I would want a robot like, and when I say me, I'm talking about me as a consumer, me as an end consumer. There's a bunch of small tasks that I would want the humanoid robot to do. Like I want it to I'm going to give you the reasons as to why I personally decided that I will own one at some point. Having one investment that I can make that mows my lawn for me, that cooks my food for me, that does my laundry for me, that cleans for me, that cuts my hair for me without having to leave the house. There's a bunch of different like small tasks that you would actually really like to be done. But that's a complicated problem. I don't have as much money to spend on one as like a business versus like something I just saw the other day was a warehouse. And the warehouse, no humans can even there's no walking space for humans. The entire floor is a grid. It's like, picture like a checkered board just spanning, like 1 square mile probably inside this building. And it's just all like, I don't know, like picture boxes that are all just kind of like routing and shifting around each other and whatnot. And like it goes directly to the wall where like the trucks like go right into the port and whatnot, and it moves it around. It's very, very interesting. It's like that's something that that's a problem that you solve once, and now you can print that, rinse and repeat that for every supply chain and logistics company, everybody with a warehouse, things like that. So you're seeing a lot of things like that. I recently started a data center company, and a gentleman that is my co-founder and partner with me on that has been building data centers for 20 years. He was a former CTO at Ericsson. It was a $40 billion company. And he has half a dozen patents for software that orchestrates humanoid robots and drones. So like I'm working with him. He has a live deployment for a Chevron facility, actually, of like a live oil refinery being run with humanoid robots and drones. And that's something that like did not exist like just a few years ago. So it's like, it is still coming. I think the businesses are going to see it first. And I would say that we'll start seeing them in the homes of end consumers by the end of the decade.
Yeah. And when you think about robots in law enforcement, for example, you described the warehouse, which is, quite an innovation that is probably very efficient. And then you move toward the rinse and repeat. You've got a bad guy holed up in a house somewhere. You can send in a robot that people can have, 360 vision and can confront a bad guy. And the robot's not pulling the trigger, but somebody who...
But it's not being stopped either. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But if somebody shoots the robot, then we've lost a robot. Okay, right. So we haven't lost a human.
Yeah.
Or the robot can be covered in Kevlar and can withstand some.
That's actually a great example. The reason that's a great example is because at first I was ready to disagree because I was like, well, I think that police officers actually are one of the professions where the human element is part of the value proposition, which is what I was going to say. But for that instant, it's funny how, you could have a police officer where in one of their days on the job, it's part of their value proposition. And then on another day on the job where they have to go into a building where there's like a hostage. And I actually know a guy I went to high school with who's a police officer that has been in both of these situations. And he nearly got shot. He had to go with the SWAT team to a situation like you're describing. And he nearly got shot, but the criminal's gun jammed. And after that, he quit being a cop. He got a different job. He said it like completely changed his outlook on things and whatnot. And this is a great guy. And I'm like, wow, like there are other stories like that didn't have such a happy ending. And it's like, how great would it be to not have to risk the most precious asset, the human life, to get that job done? And it's powerful stuff. And whenever you think about that, it's like, well, obviously this has to continue because that's the prize that's up for grabs. That's the prize that doesn't get talked about as much.
Right. Yeah. And it's those special circumstances that we're not aware of because we're not in law enforcement or whatever that profession might be, where those in that profession can say, it's 98% safe, but boy, those 2% are pretty deadly. So what can we do? And that's a good time for technology to come in and be extremely useful. Since you mentioned data centers, generally data centers are pretty benign. They're out somewhere. There's a bunch of computers, air conditioners, and so on. I mean, the operation of them is pretty minimal. There's debate about the construction of them because there's a huge community impact of the construction, and then there's an energy component that is pretty big. And our society may not be ready for all the energy that we have to build to supply the data centers. Have you had any thoughts about the impacts of data centers and how they're being constructed in some of those debates?
Yes, I have. And I joke with some friends of mine that data centers have become the Nickelback of infrastructure projects. That is honestly how I feel. Where in 2005, everybody loves Nickelback. And then somewhere along the way, it became a bit, and people started just hopping on the bandwagon because they felt like that was what they were supposed to do. I think similar stories happen with data centers. Most of the stories that you hear are sensationalized by people with political objectives. There's a couple stats that can summarize the entire story, as far as I'm concerned. For starters, let's talk about the water issue, because that is the most fake issue of all of it. There's a county in California, which you were, I believe the biggest utilities company was it LA?
Well, the biggest utility in California is Pacific Gas and Electric.
California. Okay. So are you familiar with Imperial County?
Yes.
Absolutely. So the golf courses, you know where I'm going with this probably. The golf courses in Imperial County, just the golf courses.
The middle of the desert, the super hottest part of the country, yeah.
Yeah, they're like, let's golf here. Let's do a lot of golfing here. Just the golf courses in Imperial County, California use 3,000 times as much water as the combined use of AI in America. So when people talk about how data centers are so bad for the environment and wasting our water and whatnot, it's like, I mean, if you want the biggest bang for your buck, go tell them to quit playing golf in Imperial County, California. And you're going to do if you get that done, you're going to do 3,000 times as much good, quote unquote, as you would if you shut down every single data center and every AI company in America. That's a pretty powerful stat, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's the first stat. The second stat is they've used AI to optimize water irrigation in South America. There's one specific story about this. I'm sure you can find it online pretty easily. Just through that one solution of this water irrigation, they saved more water than all of what AI has consumed of all water. So the technology has already paid for itself in water. So there's the water part. Those two stats are basically everything you need to know about the water component. Actually, I lied. There's a third stat that you need to know about the water component. And the third stat is more of like an update, I guess. Really, it's that NVIDIA basically just solved the water problem. Yeah. And they won't be the only ones to do it. There's a whole bunch of people that are trying to dethrone the NVIDIA monopoly, and so they're going to have to follow suit. But NVIDIA alone just came out with a new chip. I forget the name, but it just came out with a new chip that is self-immersion liquid cooling, and it reduces the. I'm going to butcher the science, so I encourage people to go read about it. But NVIDIA basically knew that the water thing was a hot button for a lot of different groups and whatnot. They basically solved it to where this next generation of hardware that's going to be coming out is going to use up to potentially 100% reduction in the amount of water that is required. So the water thing is kind of put to bed from my perspective based on those three things. And any one of them on their own would put it to bed for me personally.
Yeah.
So that's the water side of things. On the power side of things, that one's not solved yet. They do consume a lot of power. There is going to have to be things that happen with the power. A lot of the horror stories about people's utility bills skyrocketing and different things like that, I think a lot of those situations have been resolved now. The uproar worked, and there's a lot of dynamics that play into it, but there's been that cause and effect relationship has happened, and there's a lot fewer of those stories, and I think those stories are trending to zero. So that is good news for local populations that don't want to have to deal with it and whatnot. The power thing is going to get solved in a couple different ways. One, I think that there's plans to start putting data centers in space, and if and when that happens, that's going to be a pretty big game changer, because then you can have access to not just 24/7 solar versus only a certain number of hours per day here, but space is naturally cold. We don't have to worry about the release of heat, and it's a higher quality of solar energy that gets received whenever it doesn't have to go through the Earth's atmosphere and everything like that. So on paper, and I'm sure there's going to be problems with it and delays and things like that. On paper, that is going to be a very powerful long-term solution, I feel. I don't know if it's going to happen as soon as 2027, 2028, like the stories are saying. I think the latest story is that Elon's going to get it done in 2028. Google's got a big push for it as well. So I don't know if it'll be that soon, but it's another thing that I'm not really worried about on the long horizon, because I just see that there's a lot of progress that's being made on that front. There's also some attempts that are being made to put them in the ocean and things like that, and use the waves of the ocean to power it nonstop and whatnot, which is a cool idea. It's a cool concept and whatnot. It doesn't actually generate enough power to be meaningful. I think that it's going to cause a rise in the amount of renewable energy that we need to produce, which I think the people that are complaining about the energy will actually like. That to happen. And it's a similar story where in 1999, I think it was the New York Times put out some story saying that by 2010, the internet was going to consume, it was some ridiculous amount of the world's electricity. It was over 50%. I think it might have even been 90% or something. It was some crazy number. And what actually ended up happening, as we can see that we're fine, what actually ended up happening is that the rate of innovation far exceeded the rate of adoption. And I think that we're seeing that same thing in AI, which is crazy to say because the adoption rate has still been going parabolic, but I think so is the innovation rate. That's something that's different about this technological boom as opposed to others, is even though with other previous technological booms, I'll use crypto as an example. With other previous technological booms, you hit a point where it's no longer just the early adopters. You hit a point where it's become saturated, and that's where people are using terms that they don't know. It's buzzword salads. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to do everything and whatnot, and that's usually the writing on the wall where okay, this thing's about to burst. The difference now is that we've reached the point of saturation. Everybody's talking about AI that doesn't know anything about AI. Everybody's an AI consultant. Everybody has an opinion and whatnot. Everybody's using buzzwords. The difference is that we're still breaking through these ceilings of capabilities. New capabilities are still coming out, despite the fact that the masses have caught up and everybody's in the room now and everybody's talking and it's a lot of noise. The ratio of noise to signal is different and whatnot. But the people that are moving the needle, they haven't stopped. They haven't hit their wall. They're still moving the needle. And that's what's different about this one, I think.
Yeah. They're seeing the problems and saying, okay, that's a problem. We're going to work on it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. By the way, when you said data centers in space, I have learned in talking to you to not make a funny face when I hear something that I think is crazy and just say, well, okay, I guess that's going to happen. Whatever, data centers in space. Yeah, right. But
space is big business now.
I know.
It's part of why we just had the largest IPO in history.
Exactly. But that's what was going on in my head. Yeah, data centers in space. All right.
It was a similar vibe. It's a similar vibe to when I told my father that Neuralink was going to let people send emails to each other with just their thoughts, and my dad's like, I don't know if that'll ever happen. And
Well, come to think of it, I do want that to happen. I want AI to, when I go to my phone and I've been having a conversation with somebody about looking for a good movie, I want it just to be listening to me and then just pop up, well, since you've been talking about a movie, let me recommend some movies to you. Okay, one other last thing, and that is it's about the economy. And at least today, right now, the economy is sort of muddling along for a variety of reasons. War, prices are high, and so on, and that's going to change over time. But the companies that are sort of driving the stock market are the major technology companies. Apple, Google, NVIDIA, we could run through a few others. And I'm wondering how much of a bubble that is to the economy. Have you thought about the potentially overinvestment in AI companies and what that could be doing to the economy? And if it could be a bubble, what might pop the bubble?
yes, I've thought about it. It's a tricky one. I don't. There's some diagram showing how most of the U.S. economy is like five companies. You know, the Oracles, OpenAI's, Microsoft, like these 5 or 6 companies just trading money back and forth with each other, and that is interesting. And I honestly, I don't know if I've done enough homework to speak to it as confidently and intelligently as I can speak to other components of this whole thing. Is it a bubble? It depends on how you define bubble. I think because I think that this technology will have more economic impact than any other technology that's ever come before it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not overpriced right now. So those are two different things. When I think bubble, I think about like pricing has exceeded value created. And right now that could be true. On the long run, I don't think like there's any way for that to be true. I think that the costs, we're racing towards something that creates an era of abundance where the costs of goods and services plummets, right? So I'm hoping that the bubble deflates as opposed to pops. And I don't see any way for us to reach a point where the pricing exceeds the value created in the long term forever. I don't think that's going to happen. As for the short term, I think it's certainly possible. And as for what could cause that popping, I honestly don't. I don't know what it could be aside from. I think that it would be some sort of politics, something to do with policy, whether it's like taxing the companies goes wrong, or putting restrictions on when we can release things, or who gets to buy what, and things like that. I think that's a difficult thing. It's always been difficult. That's something that's not unique to AI. That's something that's not unique to America. This is something that's always been difficult, and there's always been teams of very smart people trying very hard to solve this problem. I'm not the one that's going to give you the answer for sure. So that's something for us to keep our eyes on. I would say that I would expect some sort of change between now and, I don't know how often we're going to do these, but if we have one of these podcasts between you and I next year, or the year after, let's say 2 years, I would say 2 years from now, there needs to be a difference in the dynamic. I think that if the current dynamic continues scaling the way it is, then I don't know how the economy reacts to that. So yeah, in summary, I would say that's an area to keep our eyes on. I don't think it's necessarily the case that anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just an unprecedented economic situation that we found ourselves in, and nobody really knows how it's going to pan out. That's how I would summarize my stance.
Yeah. If there's going to be a pullback, it would only be because the way the stock market works is people invest in the future. And if the future is overvalued, then at some point there would be a little pullback.
Right. Correction.
But the future is still trending in the direction of this technology and new technologies working, toward general intelligence. So it's sort of like in the 60s in the movie The Graduate, when, I don't know, Dustin Hoffman's future grandfather says to him, let me just tell you one word, plastics. And, AI is the plastics of our generation. And it's going to continue to grow. We just don't know in what ways the tendrils will grow out. But it is a reasonable bet that it's going to continue?
That gives me an idea. I think maybe a better way for me to answer that is what would cause it to pop would be, one, it could be something with policy and whatnot. But two, I think it would have to be if the breakthroughs stop. If the breakthroughs stop, if we hit some unexpected wall or ceiling on the capabilities and whatnot, that makes it look like we're not going to get to the other side. Because really, it's just a game of like getting to the top of the hill until we have like full on AGI and whatnot, and then it's just the rest of it's smooth sailing. We start taking our hands off the wheel. Is the sci-fi take, right? So I would say that if we hit some wall, then the people that are like, oh, I was betting on this grand future, no, we just hit a wall. That would cause it. So I would say if we stop hitting the breakthroughs, but as long as the breakthroughs continue, I think that the funding is going to continue as well. The bull market will continue.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Let me get a picture for you and show you something.
Okay. I hope it's not of tulips.
No tulips. No, this is actually one of my greatest disappointments as a result of AI. So this is a picture of a guy sitting at the beach, and he's bald, and he's, but you can see a little stubble around his head, and there's a light bulb tattooed on his head. You see that? Yeah. Right. There's nothing special about it. It's real. Like, I was on the beach in Panama City, Florida, on a Sunday morning with my family, and this guy was on the beach, and he was just sitting there looking out at the ocean. And I said to him, hey, I work in the electric utility industry. Do you mind if I take a picture of your head? And he said, oh, yeah, that'd be great. I would love that. Absolutely. And so I got my camera. It was a nice 35 millimeter camera. And I took the picture. And then I came back to the office, in my electric utility office, and I printed this out and I showed a bunch of people. And they said, oh, you manipulated that. That's Photoshop. And like, no, this guy was at the beach. And I got his address, in fact, because he wanted me to send him a copy of the picture. And it's like, no, that's a bunch of bullshit, no.
Yeah.
And I think, that picture, I can certainly recreate this picture with I could, take a picture of it and put any other animal I wanted right here on his head. But I'm sad because this real picture is no longer believable, because it could be created by AI, in seconds. But I still have it up on my wall because it brought me back to that real moment of a guy who had a light bulb tattooed on the back of his head. He ran a Harley Davidson garage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Austin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all this information. It's amazing how fast AI is moving and how we are experiencing AI at the same time. So where we were when we talked about AI, let's say a year ago, is it was still a dream that some people were playing with. And now a lot of folks are in the pool. Some people obviously are in the deep end of the pool, but we're in the pool, we're using it, and we're experiencing many of the things that you talked about. So it's fascinating to get an update on that, and I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Likewise, and thank you very much for having me. I love the topic. I love talking about it. It gives me an outlet for all the time I spend reading, and yeah, it's great.
While we're here, what do you do with AI? Yeah, I imagine that you consult on AI and you speak on AI, right?
I do, yes. So I do a few things aside from using it on a personal level or in my role, so to speak, with like drafting contracts and things like that. I'm the one of the owners of a company called Autonomy. We recently made a pivot to a managed service for accountants. So we automate bookkeeping for accountants. It's the boring work that they don't want to be doing. It's the flossing your teeth portion of an accountant's work, right? They'd much rather be spending their time on things like tax strategy or things that are more stimulating or more, there's more of a way for them to stretch their legs, intellectually speaking. So yeah, that's something that we've been focused on a great deal, scaling that up. I think there's going to be a big shift from both professional services and products into sort of I think of managed service as sort of the hybrid between a professional services and a product company, and I think that we're going to see a big influx of managed service companies.
Wow, that's fascinating. And tell me your email address so people can get in touch with you.
You just do Austin at austinambrozi.com.
Awesome. And we'll also put that in the show notes.
Perfect.
We'll put it on the screen and we'll put it in the show notes.
Wonderful. And yeah, so aside from that, I do public speaking on AI and some consulting here or there. Trying to do a little bit less consulting now, but there's, never say never. So.
Great. Thanks, Austin. So what's the one big takeaway from part 2 of our conversation with Austin Ambrozi? I think it's this. The safest career strategy in the age of AI is to keep learning faster and staying ahead of changes in your job. Austin's point is not that every job disappears tomorrow, and it's not that every person needs to become an AI expert. It's that AI is changing the leverage equation. One person with the right tools can now do work that's used to take a team, a summer, or a specialist. If you don't know AI, that can feel threatening or even daunting. But the practical move is simple. Don't resent the tool. Learn the tool. Pay attention to where AI is showing up in your field. Use it on your tasks. Build judgment around what it does well and where it fails. And maybe most important, look for the human parts of your work that still create trust, context, judgment, accountability, and relationships. The future won't reward people who pretend AI isn't happening. It'll reward people who keep adapting while everyone else is still arguing and complaining about the change. Okay, time for action. If you're tired of managing drama, chasing accountability, and carrying the weight of a low-energy team, it's time for a better way. I help leaders and organizations build stronger teams, healthier cultures, and real momentum. Together, we'll identify where your current structure is falling short and what it will take to move from a stagnant, conflict-filled environment to a high-performing, purpose-driven organization. I speak and train frequently on leadership, teamwork and culture, influence and persuasion, and AI and the future of work. Now is the time for action. Send me an email at barrymoline@gmail.com and let's explore how to move you forward. I'm Barry Moline. See you soon.